Guys, we're just going to be covering omega-3 fatty acids today, and looking at what are the requirements, what are the needs, and where are different population groups, um, what the requirements are for the different sexes, um, the official guidelines in that regard. We know that that sort of research there's a lot of caveats and question marks on it, obviously. But, people, there's a lot of confusion out there about what are my requirements? Do I need to eat more fish, Harry? These sort of questions always abound. Sorry about the croaky voice. Was down with the flu, so wonderful. Another wonderful experience. But let's share my screen and let's cover some of those important points. Okay, so this is the official National Institute of Health website, and this is covering the omega-3 fatty acids for professionals. So when we're looking down here, obviously young kids, it's total omega-3s, because usually breast milk, for 1 year to oblivion in terms of age. They have different recommendations, but the intake requirement or adequate intake is based on the ALA. So that's the plant-based version. Okay. So when we look at food sources, you can actually see ALA mostly in, flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, and so on and so on. Canola oil, no thanks, and the likes. We'll find a bit of dairy and a few other things, beans, kidney beans, and the likes. A lot of beans don't have much in comparison, as you can see. It's usually a lot of the seeds that tend to have a lot of these fats, nuts, seeds, and all that. But also they have a lot of anti-nutrients, so they do have a dark side, let's put it that way. Most DHA, EPA, mostly in the seafood, tends to be quite high. These are just 3 ounces. Tends to be quite high in terms of the amounts. And when we go down here, you can see we look at quite a few other things, much lower. Eggs, that would be 30 milligrams, so 0.03 times 30. So that is what, 1,000 milligrams in a gram. Anyway, so that's really the sort of some of the general information. We'll look into some of the more food sources in that regard. So pretty much the key ones that most of these websites do cover is alpha linoleic acid, eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA. So that's the ones that most of the websites do focus on. But there is another one, and that's called DPA. Now, DPA, docosahexaenoic acid, designates any straight open chain polyunsaturated fatty acid which contains 22 carbons and 5 double bonds. Okay? This is a sort of form that you'll find in a lot of ruminant animals. In most animals, you'll find this form. It seems to be like a storage form. So in the way it's in cells. So pretty much DPA is structurally similar to EPA, with the same number of double bonds, but has 2 more carbon chain units. So additional carbon. So that is enzymatically how it gets modified into DPA from EPA. Sort of sources, most fish are pretty high in it. When it comes to, the highest, I think one of the highest dietary sources from ruminant animals is beef brains. I suspect lamb's brains and all that would be similar. There's just 3, and you've already got about 326 milligrams. So it's quite an amount. Also, seal meat, Inuits are getting plenty, and human breast milk are rich in DPA. So that's one thing. Now, we need to look at this is a sort of conversion pathway. So if somebody's consuming ALA, they're going to go through these steps all the way down to EPA. Now, from EPA, they can go to DPA, or they can go all the way down to DHA. Remember, these are sort of interchangeable. So and this is the important part. So your EPA, DHA, there are 2 intermediate, DPA and THA. Now, DPA is sort of more related to EPA because it just has 2 extra carbon chains. But THA is sort of an intermediate conversion from DPA to get to DHA. Now, as you can see with the arrows here, EPA and DHA can actually interchange. There is enzymatic steps where they can go directly to EPA from DHA or from EPA directly back to DHA. So that's possible within the body enzymatically, where DPA is sort of one of those steps where if you've got too much EPA, it'll actually put it away as DPA and store it in a sense. And if more DHA is needed, it'll take the DPA, convert it to THA, and then from there to DHA. And so even if there's not enough EPA in the system, this storage form can provide those additional needs. So that's important. And we find that in all land-based animals as well, and in humans, because we get a lot of DPA from mother's milk. So it's a good way of actually guaranteeing that the child has enough of the essential fatty acids. So if it needs to do the conversion, there's enough in the cell stored away to basically furnish the cell with DHA fast. So because they're essential. So you need to have a reservoir to be able to utilize. Now, this is an important thing when we look at the RDIs, and they're based on ALA. So what's the conversion rate? For EPA, it's 5%. For DHA, it's 0.5%. It's abysmal. So if we're looking at, 5.5% gets converted to EPA and DHA, so 0.055 times 1,600. If you have the recommended intake of ALA, what your body will convert, which is 5.5%, you will get 88 milligrams as a male of EPA DHA. Okay? Because people are asking me, what is my requirement? What do I have? Do I need to supplement? Well, this is why I'm telling you. You know, if you're having all the ALA, what the recommended, because at that level, they do not see essential fatty acid deficiency. So if somebody gets 1,600, they've done those experiments, they know that this is the conversion rate, which basically means that you're getting this amount of EPA DHA, which pretty much means that that is the bare minimum, and it seems to prevent an essential fatty acid of omega-3 deficiency. So they would have done some tests in that regard and confirmed that that was the case. Obviously, we would like to get a bit more and then allow the body to, store a bit away and for a rainy day, so to speak. Anyway, but just so we have a benchmark. So for women, which is 1,100 times 0.055, that's 60.5 milligrams. And for pregnant women, which is 14.5 times 0.055, that's 77. And for lactating women, times 13.5, that's 71.5. So give or take, we're talking about for women at a maximum, nearly 80, 77, nearly 80. And for men, nearly 90. You can round it off. And that covers any of your circumstances in that regard. Just so we've got an idea. Now, there are guidelines out there. We've talked about the RDA recommended daily allowance or daily intake. The RDI, same thing, interchangeable, just different language. 1.6 for men, 1.1 for women in terms of grams. Now, there have been a number of organisations that have actually done certain research. People can go and check those studies. I'll leave it up to them. And so overall, most of these organisations recommend a minimum of 250 to 500 milligrams combined EPA DHA each day for healthy adults. Now, obviously, they should include DPA there because DPA has the ability to enzymatically, it's a storage form. So we can actually say combined of EPA, DHA and DPA and THA, any one of those as a combination, we're looking at 250 to 500. Okay. So I would say that's way above what the conversion rate, which we've looked at the numbers in that regard. So hard-boiled eggs, okay? So one large hard-boiled egg. So obviously it doesn't have, it's got more DHA. So if we're looking at combined 0.003 plus 0.019 times 1,000, 22 times 4 would give you, based on the ALA conversion, the RDI, 4 eggs. you'd have yourself covered in terms of the RDI. I'd go above that, but I'm just using this as just so people have got an idea in that regard. Now, in terms of lamb, again, ruminant animals, they tend to have more of the stored form in that regard, or they have the ALA as well, which they get from the grass. Okay? So, and this they get from the little organisms which they digest in the final chamber. So that's the protozoa, the bacteria, all the different little organisms that are in there, the yeasts and everything else that's growing and fermenting the fibrous stuff that gets pooped out, and then the final acidic chamber is absorbing these little organisms that have grown that can provide this sort of stuff. So when we're looking at, this is 100 grams. So 100 grams, just for memory for people, is 3.53 ounces, just so people remember that. So when we go 13 times 0.055, you're only getting about very little, as you can see, in that regard, times 6. Absolutely very little in terms of, because remember, you're only getting a very small conversion, maybe more, but you're getting very small conversion. Okay. They should have the same figure on this website. So just so people know the percentages, 1,600. It's sort of, these are at the male level, the percentages. That's a round off, obviously. So just for people to know. Now, we've got 25 milligrams plus 36 milligrams plus 11 milligrams plus the conversion, which is the 5.5%, which is 6.215. So from 100 grams of lamb, so your total useful omega-3s, you'll get pretty much 78. Now, okay, so I'll just take that down. So let's say somebody's 70 kilos, 70 kilo person. Oops. Example. And they're doing about times 2 grams per kilo body weight. Divide that by, we'll go approximately 25, because usually protein levels are about that between different ruminants. Some to 26, some to 24. It sort of varies depending on the cut of meat. We'll just go for 25 as an average. You're looking at, for the protein requirement of just getting it from just that, you're looking at 560. Oops. Let's take 4 eggs out. So let's just do it for this now. Sorry. 560. What am I? 100 times 78.22. You're going to get about 438. So you're way within this area. You're in the upper limit of this and way above the RDI, way above the RDI, just to make that quite clear. Because compared to the RDI, we'll just do it for males. Divided by 88, you're about 5-fold higher. Okay. Now, cooked steak, beef. Beef, again, doesn't have a lot of, I know that grass-fed does have a bit. This is just a standard steak. It's probably grain-fed. It's going to have much lower. But it does have quite a lot of DPA. So ALA quite low compared to lamb. It has far more essential fatty acids, omega-3s in particular. That's well known. So when we're looking at that, we'll go for 0.028 times 0.025, pretty much 1.5 grams, bugger all. Plus 10 plus 23. So if we are eating the same quantity, so times 5.6, just from the meat, you'll get 193. So that's still higher than, it's not as high as what they sort of recommend. You can add a couple of eggs. If you add 4 eggs, it's 88. You're well above the 250. Big steak, add 4 eggs, you're done, if you're concerned. So it's not very difficult with animal foods to get enough. It's actually more of a problem for people with plant-based food because of the poor conversion to get sufficient. And it's the reason why they've got the RDI so high, because they're trying to force people to eat more in order to get a bit more conversion. And then people are eating a lot of seed oils, which is also inhibiting because, omega-3s, omega-6s to go from linoleic acid to go into arachidonic acid, they have to go through the same enzymatic pathway. There's a bottleneck there. We know it. And this is why there's a very poor conversion rate. And if somebody's sick, got underlying conditions, on a sad diet, they're going to even have poorer conversion sort of rates. Just so people are aware. Now, when we look, I've just put all three, looking at dairy, again, it's usually eggs. Butter is a really good source. So you got butter. So 100 grams of butter. 45 plus 3 plus 22. We'll get about 70. So if you want to have like 50 grams of butter, I sometimes will put that on a steak. Makes it nice, and I'll use some on my eggs and all that. So I may use that amount or slightly less, even if you're using just, let's say, 1 ounce, just a bit over an ounce. So times 2 divided by 3, you can still get about 23, which is very similar to 1 egg, as an example. So you could substitute an ounce plus for an egg in terms of butter. Most of it is in DPA, which means that it just goes and gets into the cells, gets sort of stored away, and if it needs it, it'll use it. So, which is fine, which means you don't have to convert it yourself, the body. So it can be advantageous. So dairy fat is quite high in DPA. So even though that's why, when you look at the official site, it looks really appalling because they've only covered the ALA in that regard. But it does have, the fats and all that, and it's probably, skim milk, and they probably haven't covered it properly. It's, not all the RDI, the USDA database points are covered properly. So, which is another issue in itself. So even processed cheese has a bit. Heavy whipped cream seems to have less. Not really sure why. The thing is, if people, I'll provide all these links anyway. It's not impossible to get on the carnivore diet to get sufficient. That's even without consuming any fish. Now, I do consume minimum once a week fish. Sometimes I'll consume, and I usually consume it. I'm not going to consume like 100 grams, 3.5 ounces. I'll be consuming like anywhere between 400 to 500 grams, usually, like half a kilo, which is slightly over 1 pound of fish. If I'm going to have fish, I'm going to have fish. I'll have a pound of fish. So through just once, I definitely do that every week. I'm going to get more than enough, you know. And remember, fish also has a good level of DPA, so they'll get stored away. It's there available to be used. And the body, like all mammalian animals, have those enzymes to convert DPA, DHA, and EPA to DPA. So if you're getting animal foods, you'll get more than enough DPA from a lot of the ruminant animals. As I said, most ruminant animals are primarily DPA, which is a storage form. So that's fine. You can utilize that as well. We can utilize that in our body. Breast milk is very high in it. So it's something that we naturally can absorb and utilize. It has a number of benefits. There are many gurus out there that claim that it's even better than DHA and EPA. I don't get too wound up because a lot of let's say, the evidence is associated. So I don't get too wound up, but it definitely has benefits. It definitely seems on a number of fronts, even some experimental evidence, which is in animal models, seems to have superior effects biological compared to EPA or DHA. So since ruminant animals are much higher, and so are fish in DPA, I would say that we as carnivores would be getting more than enough to cover our needs in terms of those important omega-3 essential fatty acids. Uh, the concern would be, and I can understand why the authorities have these massive requirements for ALA. You'd have to be constantly eating seeds and nuts with all the anti-nutrients in order to get anywhere close to those needs. So obviously, the general community out there probably, are having their hamburgers, they're having certain processed meats, and that's where they're getting the DPA And that sort of is what is masking that issue. Where we actually notice more of this problem in terms of essential fatty acid deficiency is usually in the vegans, because they're only getting ALA, and the only other option for them is highly rancid, problematic algal sources of DHA. So that's not a good, I mean, yes, you'll cover those needs, but the problem is you're also introducing a lot of aldehydes and primary, secondary oxidative products. That's going to create health problems long term for those sort of people in that regard. But, and if you take a look, most of the marketing for those sort of supplements is really directed towards the plant-based community, because the general community is eating the occasional hamburger here. Yes, they are eating the seed oils and the refined sugars and the fructose and the high fructose corn syrup and all the other garbage you can think of under the sun, but they are getting slightly more, quite substantially more DPA in comparison to the plant-based community. And that's probably why we don't really see such essential fatty acid deficiencies in the general public in that regard. And if, based on the conversion rates and what the RDIs say, they're getting within that sort of 80 to 100 milligrams per day, they're probably just barely sort of covering their needs in a sense. It's probably that minimal based on the conversion rate, and so they're getting that. Now, I would say to most people, sort of aim for the 250, because from what a lot of those studies have shown, there seems to be more benefit in that regard. But if you're eating sufficient ruminant meat, eggs, and stuff like that, you'll exceed the 250 very easily on a carnivore diet. So we don't need a supplement, is what I'm trying to push across to people. You do not need to supplement essential fatty acids. We get more than enough on our diet. And if you're really concerned you're maybe not getting sufficient, as I've shown you, and let me just share my screen, and I'll actually cover as well the fish, just so, okay, let me just replace that. Fish. I've got it to 100 grams, all these, so as you can see, quite high. Mackerel, 300, just 100 grams. That's 100 grams. I'm not going to eat 100 grams. I'd be starving. I'm going to have about 400 grams, minimum 350. So let's say you have 300, three times that, 3 times 391. You're already, that's before we've even talked about DHA, just DPA, storage form. You're getting way. So let's say 2.965 plus 0.391 plus 1.619. So that's mackerel. So nearly 5 grams. So if we look at, divide that by 500, that's 10 times. 10 times. So add to that even more, where you're going to be. You're going to be quite high. So just having mackerel once a week Okay. Some of you people like raw farmed Atlantic salmon. So you want an Atlantic salmon, you want it farmed because you can't be bothered with paying the premium cost of the wild, snap frozen, that is. So 393 plus 862, you're getting 2,359. Just this is only 100 grams. 100 grams. Bugger all in that regard. 4.7 times, nearly fivefold. You can't, and even if, let's say the body couldn't convert DHA to or EPA to DPA and store it. Let's say it didn't have that ability, which is bullshit because it does, but let's say it didn't have the ability and we were just reliant on that. 393 times 4 times 400 grams. Now divide that by 7. You're getting about 220, nearly 225. So you're nearly hitting the 250 just from once. And that's just this. Forget about DHA, EPA. We're just looking at DPA from just salmon once a week. So it is impossible to be deficient on a carnivore diet, especially if you're having fish once a week. Impossible. It has to be something really wrong. And you can actually see all these just go through and through different types. Tuna, I like tuna. So 1.1, oops, sorry. 1141 plus 0.60 plus 363. Again, that's 100. I'm not going to eat that. Minimum tuna that I'll eat. Let's say you just have one tuna at 100 grams, a little can, okay? You're still going to get quite a bit. So if we divide that by 7 days, you see, you're nearly covered just from that one little 100 grams of tuna. You're nearly covered for all your weekly needs. So it's impossible on a carnivore diet to be deficient in omega-3s. It's just not possible, for something like that to happen. So if you hear anyone claiming that you can't get enough of the omega-3s on a carnivore diet, personally, I would say I'd be dumbfounded. If there's any diet that will give you shitloads of omega-3s, it's a carnivore diet. It's an animal-based diet. That's where the majority is. You don't have to deal with the ALA conversion. You get very little in most animal foods. The majority of stuff you're getting is EPA, DHA, and DPA. And also, because unfortunately, THA isn't recorded anywhere. You can't get a database for it. I've looked. Unfortunately, there isn't. Somebody knows of one, please let me know. But there isn't, because I'd really like to know what the amounts are of THA in animal foods, because it could be even more. I don't know. Got no idea. But I'd really be keen to find out. But nobody's going to get a deficiency, is what I'm trying to say. If you eat ruminant meat, a couple of eggs, it is impossible for you to get any deficiency whatsoever. And remember, people in a species appropriate to a carnivore diet don't have much inflammation. They're on a low inflammatory diet, because that's what it is. And so their needs for omega-3s are also slightly reduced. And as I said, we've got slightly reduced requirements, but we're getting more than the general community, especially the veganerized community. So it is absolute nonsense for anybody to claim that there is a risk of getting some sort of omega-3 deficiency on a carnivore diet. Impossible. You've seen the numbers. They're quite obvious. Unless you're fasting every friggin' day and starving yourself and not getting enough nutrients, that's a different story. Then you're actually not doing a carnivore diet. You're doing a fasting mimicking diet. No different than some of the Vagoon fasting mimicking diets, constantly detoxing into oblivion until they become skeletons from, from malnutrition and starvation. We're not talking about that sort of scenario. We're talking about normal people eating a species-appropriate diet are not going to get into deficiencies. So I think we should put that to rest. The figures are quite clear. Even the RDIs require way lower. I would rather be between that 250 and 500. Obviously, if you're a person, let's say, of average height, like, let's say shorter, you'd look at the 250 mark, somewhere in the middle between the 250 and 500 for an average height person. And for a tall person, 6 foot plus, you'd look at the 500. And those people are going to have, they're not going to eat, like the amount, like half a kilo, a pound. They're going to have 2 pounds. They're going to have 3 pounds. They're going to get shitloads for their body size. Because that's how I view it. I don't view these RDIs, general sort of nonsense numbers that they set arbitrarily. Somebody who's 50 requires 1,600 as a male. Well, how big is he? Is he short? Is he medium-sized? Is he tall? Large? It's just nonsense numbers. I prefer veterinary science because they look at the size of the animal and they determine based on the needs of the tissue that requires a lot of the micronutrients and macronutrients, what it requires to maintain that tissue. That's why we focus on when we actually say we talk about, so much protein per kilo body weight and for your activities level. So we're quite clear on what. And then your fat needs will be based on your energy requirements, how physically active you are and whatever else. And you tend to learn with time what sort of where your levels are. You play around because a lot of us come from a very damaged diet lifestyle. So as we come into a carnivore diet, we need to play around with these things just to get it right. And once we do, things are way better in that regard. You get better skin and we get better, just general feeling. Now, that's pretty much it to cover all those points. I'll provide all the links in that regard. And hopefully this will put this issue to rest as well, for my subscribers at least. Please share this video around with your friends so they're aware of, so they've got an understanding of what are the needs and, and so we can counter the bullshit because there is a lot out there, unfortunately. There's in particular coming from sort of people that were ex-paleo or that sort of thinking mode. They really go on, they ramble on continuously about, you need thousands of milligrams of, no, you don't. And excessive amounts of omega-3s, we know, does cause clotting issues. So you can get bleeding and stuff like that. So no, it's not a good idea. Excessive amounts, like in the thousands and thousands every day. And that's why, even when we look at the N15 data, what do we notice? We notice that most humans prioritize ruminant meat. That was their major source. And they had some small amounts of coastal fish. So that was a small amount in their dietary intake, plus crustaceans and stuff like that, both in rivers and in coastal areas. So that's the sort of, if you have occasionally some crustaceans like oysters or whatever, or you have occasionally, fish here and there. I usually have once a week because I like fish. Sometimes I have twice, but mostly I keep it to one. I try to prioritize the other meats, which is important to get a lot of the other important elements that you get in ruminant meat. So, and I don't see the requirement for excessive amounts of omega-3s anyway, where the amount of, 6 eggs a day plus the meat, I get more than enough of essential fatty acids. So I don't really require massive amounts of fish. But I do have my time. Sometimes I'll actually have a bit more. Sometimes I have a bit less, depending on how I feel. Summer, I tend to eat a bit more seafood. In winter, I'm not as keen when it comes to it. But it does vary. Recently, like this week, I had fish. So had quite a bit actually, nearly half a kilo. But I just felt like it. So it was, it just depends how I feel. And again, just listen to your body. It's as simple as that. But again, the priority is the animal, the ruminant, the land-based animals. That should be our priority because that profile is closer to us, in a sense, is what we need. Because there's other nutrients. There's thousands and thousands of different nutrients, which we've identified in land-based animals. And that's what the N15 data has indicated, that we've been consuming for most of our existence. So that's what we should prioritize. This video is more to focus on what do we need really, and are we getting enough? We are getting way above the RDI, so we can shelve that. And between what are considered optimal, obviously these populations that need 250 to 500, let's put it this way, they're going to be populations that may have slightly more inflammation. And when they give them that extra, they notice. But remember, our diet is also less inflammatory. So you have to take that into consideration. So I wouldn't get too wound up. As long as you're getting 200 odd or plus or whatever, you're good to go. Nothing to worry about. You're way above the RDI. And, you're in the levels of people that need it sort of more than we do on our low inflammatory diet. So that's what I'm trying to bring back some sensible thinking about the issue by providing these facts. So that's basically it. I think I've covered quite clear, I've nuanced it, so you guys understand where I'm coming from. Don't fall for that nonsense anymore. The requirements are quite clear. The sources that we use are absolutely fantastic and good. So we've got nothing to be concerned about when it comes to, are we getting enough essential fatty acids, in particular the omega-3s, because omega-6s, everybody's getting enough. Question is the omega-3s that everybody gets wound up in their knickers in a knot, are they getting enough? We are. So stop worrying. Anyway, that's about it. See yous.